April 8, 1943. The war had already consumed half a decade of the world's history, and the European continent bore the scars of every passing year. Villages lay burned, great cities like Rotterdam and Warsaw scarred by rubble, and the once green farmlands of France and Belgium carried the blackened tracks of tanks and the craters of bombs. Yet more than anywhere else, it was the sky that defined the daily rhythm of war. Every morning and evening, the people of occupied France looked upward. To them, the sky was not freedom, as it had once been to aviators of the pre-war age. It was a place of constant menace, of the thunder of engines, the scream of falling bombs, the staccato chatter of machine gun fire. For them, each contrail told a story of death arriving, of power clashing above their heads, of empires testing their strength. That morning, the sky above Caen was crisp and pale blue, the horizon brushed with faint ribbons of cirrus cloud. To the untrained eye, it was peaceful, but for the men who fought in those high altitudes, it was the battlefield itself, merciless, cold, and vast. At 27,000 feet, Oberleutnant Ralph Hermeken scanned the air from the cockpit of his Focke-Wulf 190A5. The canopy glass glinted with sunlight. Frost clung to its edges. Hermeken's breath fogged the inside of his oxygen mask as he exhaled slowly, his gloved hands adjusting the stick with the calm precision of a man long accustomed to danger. He had fought in the West, against the RAF's Hurricanes and Spitfires, and in the East, where the skies swarmed with Soviet Yakovlevs and Lavochkins. He had shot down enough enemy aircraft to be considered an ace, and he believed he understood the rhythm of air combat as intimately as a soldier understands the feel of his rifle. But today the enemy was something new. Below him, 16 unfamiliar shapes rose steadily through the thinning air. Hermachin squinted against the sun, narrowing his eyes. Their outlines were awkward, almost laughable. Barrel-shaped fuselages, stubby wings, enormous propellers that seemed more fitting for a transport aircraft than a fighter. He let out a sharp laugh and keyed his radio. "The Americans have sent us flying milk bottles," he quipped. Laughter crackled across the squadron's frequency. His comrades of Jagdgeschwader 26, the famed Schlageter wing, needed little encouragement to mock these ungainly adversaries. To them, the aircraft below looked like clumsy mistakes, the products of engineers who had no sense of what a true fighter plane should be. And why shouldn't they laugh? German pilots in 1943 still carried the aura of superiority. They were veterans of the Battle of Britain, guardians of the Reich, men who had dueled the RAF for years and bloodied the skies of Russia. Their machines, the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and the Focke-Wulf 190, were regarded as the most advanced fighters in the world. Their doctrine was sharpened by years of combat, their confidence bolstered by thousands of victories. Against such experience, what could these fat, graceless American machines possibly achieve? Yet as the laughter echoed in his headset, Hermeken could not know that he was staring at the future, the very aircraft that would, within 18 months, dismantle the Luftwaffe's proud fighter arm. The Thunderbolt arrives, the Republic P-47. Thunderbolt was unlike any fighter before it. Where the Spitfire and the Messerschmitt had been designed as nimble dueling swords, the Thunderbolt was forged as a hammer. At over 7 tons fully loaded, it was the heaviest single-engine fighter of the war. Its heart was the colossal Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder, twin-row radial engine capable of generating more than 2,000 horsepower. To the Germans peering down from their trim Focke-Wulfs, this bulk looked like a weakness. But it was, in truth, the machine's greatest strength. The Jug, as its pilots soon nicknamed it, could dive faster than any aircraft in the European theater. It could absorb punishment that would rip a Spitfire's liquid-cooled Merlin to pieces. Its cockpit was wrapped in armor plate. Its fuel tanks were self-sealing. Time and again in the months ahead, men would coax crippled Thunderbolts across the channel, engines coughing, wings riddled with holes, and still land safely on English soil. And then there was its armament, 8.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 4 in each wing. Each gun carried more than 400 rounds, giving the pilot nearly 3,400 bullets to unleash. In a single second, The Thunderbolt could pour out more firepower than many early war bombers. A burst that lasted just 3 seconds could shred a German fighter or rip open the armored skin of a locomotive on the ground. It was, in short, an aircraft designed not for grace, but for overwhelming force. A juggernaut in every sense of the word. The pilot's doubt. But none of this was obvious in April 1943, not to the Germans mocking from above, nor to the Americans strapped into the cockpits of those very machines. The men of the 4th Fighter Group were no green recruits. Many had flown Spitfires in the famous Eagle squadrons before the United States formally entered the war. They knew the thrill of outturning a Messerschmitt in a tight spiral, the satisfaction of feeling a light aircraft respond instantly to aileron and rudder. To them, air combat was an art of finesse and timing. The Thunderbolt felt alien. Its climb was sluggish, its controls heavy at altitude. In training, many pilots cursed its size, compared it to a flying tank, and doubted whether it could truly match the nimble German fighters. In the mess halls of English air bases, men grumbled, "She's too big, too heavy, too slow." Yet their new commander, Major Donald Blakesley, thought differently. Blakesley was already a legend, a man who had crossed from America to Britain before his own nation joined the war, eager to fight. He had flown Spitfires, fought the Luftwaffe, and understood better than most that air combat was not static. Machines evolved, and pilots had to evolve with them. The Jug, Blakesley told his men, was not a Spitfire, and it was foolish to treat it like one. They would not win by turning tighter or climbing faster. They would win by fighting on their own terms, by diving with crushing speed, hitting hard with overwhelming firepower, and then climbing away to strike again. The Jug was not a duelist's rapier, it was a warhammer. The stage is set from the fields below. French villagers watched as contrails etched white scars across the blue sky. To them, the American planes looked impossibly large, like bombers trying to act as fighters. Farmers shaded their eyes and muttered among themselves, "Les gros tonnerres," the big thunders. They had no idea how right they were. Above, the Luftwaffe aces tightened their formation, angling their noses down for the attack. In their cockpits, the Americans gritted their teeth, hands firm on throttles, eyes fixed on the black cross shapes descending from the sun. The laughter of the Germans still crackled in the radios of JG-26, but it would not last. For on that clear April morning, the balance of the air war was about to shift. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt's arrival in Europe in the spring of 1943 was not accompanied by trumpets or grand declarations. Unlike the Spitfire, whose elegance had won instant admiration, or the Mustang, whose sleek lines suggested speed and grace, the Thunderbolt lumbered onto British airfields like some uninvited giant. To many who first laid eyes on it, the Jug looked more like a bomber that had lost its way than a fighter destined to dominate the skies. Yet war rarely reveals its truths at a glance. A newcomer to a veteran's sky. In April 1943, the Luftwaffe still commanded respect, even fear. Its fighter groups had clawed the sky clear of opposition in 1940 and 1941, and though the tide was beginning to shift, its reputation endured. Jagdgeschwader 26, stationed along the French coast, was one of the Luftwaffe's elite wings. They had bloodied the RAF in the Battle of Britain, flown countless sweeps across the Channel, and now stood as the Reich's shield against the ever-growing streams of American bombers. The German pilots flew the Focke-Wulf 190A5, a machine many considered the finest fighter of its day. With its wide wings and radial engine, it was fast, agile at low and medium altitudes, and could dive with ferocity. The men of JG-26 trusted it the way a knight trusted his sword. Against Spitfires, they had proven its worth time and again. So when word spread that the Americans were fielding a new fighter, the P-47, the Germans were unimpressed. A few reconnaissance photos circulated, and the mocking began at once. "Too heavy to fight, too slow to flee," one pilot wrote in his diary. "It looks like a milk bottle with wings," another joked. For seasoned Luftwaffe aces, the thought of facing such an aircraft was laughable, but laughter was often the first mask of fear. First missions. The Thunderbolt's first combat missions were cautious affairs. Flying from bases in East Anglia, the 4th Fighter Group began with short-range bomber escorts and sweeps across northern France. Their task was simple: protect the B-17 flying fortresses that were beginning to strike at German industry in daylight. The Americans were attempting something no one had dared before: strategic bombing in broad daylight, without the cover of night. To make such missions even remotely possible, fighter protection was essential, and so the Jug took to the sky. At first, the results were mixed. Pilots complained of the Jug's sluggish climb and its tendency to wallow in tight turns. "She handles like a farm tractor," one airman grumbled. When chased by nimble Messerschmitts, the P-47 often looked outclassed. In these early clashes, several Thunderbolts fell in flames, and some American squadrons began to question whether the aircraft was a mistake. But then came the first signs of its hidden strength. The lesson of the dive. In one of its earliest encounters, a formation of P-47s found itself bounced by a flight of FW-190s over the French coast. Outclimbed and outturned, the Americans seemed at a disadvantage. Yet instead of trying to duel in circles, one pilot shoved the throttle forward and nosed into a steep dive. The Germans, confident as ever, followed. But within seconds they were astonished. The milk bottle was accelerating like a meteor. The P-47 plunged faster than the Focke-Wulfs could safely follow, the roar of its Pratt & Whitney engine growing into a deafening thunder. At over 500 miles per hour, the Jug hurtled downward, steady and controlled, while the German machines began to shudder and buffet under the strain. Unable to match the dive, the FW-190s pulled out, and the Thunderbolt pilot leveled low over the channel, alive and intact. The lesson spread quickly through the 4th Fighter Group. Never fight the German on his terms. The Jug could not turn tighter or climb faster, but in the dive it was a predator. With speed came the opportunity to strike. Unleash 8.50 caliber bullets in a hurricane of fire, and then zoom away before the enemy could answer. The Germans take notice. These early engagements did not change German mockery overnight. In fact, Oberleutnant Hermeken and his fellow aces continued to dismiss the Thunderbolt as ungainly. Yet reports filtering up through the Luftwaffe hierarchy began to tell another story. Pilots described Thunderbolts taking terrible punishment and still refusing to fall. Others reported that their cannons, so effective against Spitfires, seemed less decisive against the Jug's armored bulk. And then there was the unnerving reality that these milk bottles could dive away from a fight and vanish, immune to pursuit. By May, Luftwaffe intelligence officers noted a shift. The Thunderbolt, they concluded, might not be pretty, but it was formidable. "This is not a Spitfire," one report warned. "It is something different, something built for endurance." The pilot's transformation. For the Americans, too, the baptism of fire was transformative. Where once they doubted their mounts, they began to discover pride in them. The Jug's cockpit, heavily armored, gave pilots a sense of invincibility. Stories spread of men bringing home machines with holes large enough to crawl through, of wings shredded and yet still flying. In a war where survival was often measured in weeks, such tales mattered. Major Donald Blakesley, who had once told his men that the Jug was a warhammer rather than a dueling blade, now saw his words confirmed in combat. He drilled his squadrons relentlessly. Dive, hit, climb away, strike again. Do not waste time turning. Do not fight the German where he is strongest. Use the Jug's power, and it will not fail you. Slowly, the laughter of the Luftwaffe was answered with confidence from the Americans. The Jug might not look like a thoroughbred, but in the hands of men who understood its nature, it was beginning to prove itself a champion. Foreshadowing the storm still, in the spring of 1943, this was only the beginning. The Luftwaffe remained strong, its aces deadly, its aircraft respected. To many on both sides, the war in the air seemed destined to grind on endlessly, a balance of strikes and counterstrikes. But history had other plans. The P-47 was more than just another fighter. It was the harbinger of a new kind of warfare, one in which ruggedness, firepower, and sheer industrial mass would outweigh elegance and tradition. Within months, the flying milk bottle would be carrying the fight deep into enemy territory, rewriting the rules of aerial combat. For now, though, over the fields of Normandy and the waters of the Channel, the Jug was still earning its name. Its baptism of fire had begun, and the world was only just beginning to understand the thunder that was coming. By the summer of 1943, the P-47 Thunderbolt was no longer a curiosity on British airfields. It was a fixture. Where once airmen had shaken their heads at its bulk, now rows of jugs lined the dispersal areas of East Anglia, engines coughing smoke as ground crews prepared them for daily missions. The Jug had survived its baptism of fire, and now it was learning to strike back. The Bomber War. At the heart of the conflict was the American doctrine of daylight precision bombing. Unlike the British, who preferred the cover of night to protect their bombers, the U.S. 8th Air Force believed that only daylight raids could achieve the accuracy required to cripple German industry. By day, bombardiers could see their targets clearly, factories, rail yards, oil refineries, and drop their payloads with precision. But daylight came with a price. The B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, proud as their names were not invulnerable. Without fighter protection, they were meat for the Luftwaffe. Bomber crews returning from missions often counted dozens of holes in their fuselages, comrades killed beside them, engines smoking, and entire formations torn apart. Casualties ran high, unsustainably high. It was into this crucible that the P-47 was thrown. First escorts. At first, the Thunderbolt's range was limited. It could only accompany bombers part of the way across the Channel before turning back. Yet even this was a start. For the men in the lumbering bombers, the sight of silver jugs sliding into formation beside them was a tonic. At last, someone was watching over them. For the Luftwaffe, it was an irritant. Accustomed to falling upon bomber formations with little interference, German pilots now found themselves intercepted by determined American fighters. The Thunderbolt's 8 Brownings could shred a Bf-109 in a heartbeat, and the Jug's armor made it a poor choice for frontal attacks. Over the coast of France, duels became routine. FW-190s diving out of the sun, Thunderbolts counter-diving to meet them, contrails twisting into corkscrews of death. Villagers below grew used to the thunderclap of guns echoing overhead, and sometimes they watched helplessly as flaming wrecks plummeted into fields. The war in the air had entered a new phase. Built like a tank. Stories of the Jug's toughness multiplied with every mission. One pilot brought his aircraft back with a cylinder blown clean out of the engine and still managed to land. Another limped home across the Channel with half a wing shredded by cannon fire. "She's built like a tank," pilots said, and word spread until it became part of the Jug's legend. Even the Luftwaffe grudgingly acknowledged it. Reports described Thunderbolts that refused to go down, that absorbed punishment which would have destroyed a Messerschmitt or Spitfire 10 times over. German ground crews examined wreckage of downed Jugs and were astonished at the armor plating and redundant systems. The Luftwaffe was beginning to learn that underestimating the Jug was a mistake. The clash over Lille 1 engagement in July 1943 symbolized this new reality. A formation of B-17s headed for the industrial city of Lille, their Thunderbolt escorts climbing steadily beside them. Waiting in the sun above were elements of JG-26, confident as ever. As the bombers neared their target, the Germans pounced. FWE-190s streaked downward, cannons blazing. But before they could tear into the flying fortresses, the Thunderbolts met them head-on. The clash was brutal. A Jug's 8 Brownings ripped apart a German fighter in seconds, the wreckage spinning earthward. Another Jug, struck by cannon shells, burst into flames. But the pilot held his course long enough to line up a shot that downed his attacker before bailing out. The sky over Lille filled with twisting trails of smoke, parachutes blossoming in the thin air. For the Germans, accustomed to easy kills against unescorted bombers, it was a shock. The Americans, once derided, were proving themselves determined opponents. Morale and momentum. These battles did not yet guarantee victory. Losses were still heavy. Missions still ended with bombers limping home, engines dead, crews bloodied. But a change was underway, subtle yet unmistakable. Among the Americans, confidence grew. Where once they cursed the Jug's bulk, they now praised its power. Pilots began to trust their aircraft, to know its strengths instinctively, dive fast, hit hard, climb away. They called it the Jug with affection now, a beast that carried them through fire and brought them home alive. Among the Germans, doubt crept in. They had always believed themselves the masters of the air, heirs to the victories of 1940. But now their opponents were stronger, their machines tougher, their numbers growing. For every German ace, a dozen American pilots stood ready. And behind those pilots lay the endless factories of the United States, producing machines faster than the Reich could hope to destroy them. The balance was not yet tipped, but the fulcrum was moving. A thunder growing. By the close of summer 1943, the P-47 Thunderbolt was no longer dismissed as a mistake. It had proven itself over Lille, over Caen, over the Channel. Its thunder had been heard by villagers, by bomber crews, by Luftwaffe pilots who once laughed but now cursed its name. And yet, this was only the beginning. The Jug had shown that it could defend bombers partway to their targets, but the war demanded more. The Americans needed fighters that could escort their bombers all the way to Germany and back, into the heart of the Reich itself. That challenge lay ahead, for now the Jug had earned its place. It was not a milk bottle. It was the storm before the storm. By late 1943, the air war over Europe had shifted decisively. The days when the Luftwaffe could strike with near impunity were fading. The Americans, once ridiculed as newcomers, were gaining ground with every month. And at the heart of this transformation was the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. It had begun the year as an awkward outsider, dismissed as too big, too heavy, too clumsy. But by the winter, it was evolving into something far more dangerous. Not merely a bomber escort, but a weapon of terror against the very lifeblood of the German war machine. Into the Reich. The bombing campaign had intensified. U.S. 8th Air Force B-17 and B-24s struck deeper into the Reich than ever before, aiming not only at factories but at oil refineries, rail yards, and ball-bearing plants. Targets that sustained the Wehrmacht's ability to fight. The Luftwaffe responded with ferocity. Its fighter wings, stretched thin, threw everything they had at the incoming formations. Over Bremen, over Hamburg, over Schweinfurt, the skies became killing grounds where hundreds of machines clashed in rolling battles that stretched for miles. The Jug was there, heavy with fuel tanks, its Pratt and Whitney engine thundering as it pushed deeper into hostile skies. At first, its limited range forced many Thunderbolts to turn back before the bombers reached their deepest targets. Losses remained high, yet even partial protection was better than none, and every month engineers worked feverishly to extend the Jug's reach. With drop tanks and modifications, the P-47 pushed further, carrying the fight into the heart of Germany. The fighter-bomber. But the Thunderbolt's story was not limited to the high altitudes of bomber escort. The Jug revealed another talent, one that would make it legendary among ground troops and feared among German soldiers. With its rugged construction, powerful engine, and heavy firepower, the P-47 was perfectly suited for ground attack missions. Squadrons began to train in dive bombing and strafing, turning the Jug into a flying artillery piece. Carrying bombs under its wings or even unguided rockets, it could devastate trains, convoys, and armored columns. In France and the Low Countries, villagers learned to tell the difference between the whine of German Stukas and the roar of the Jug. The latter meant salvation, for it often meant that the occupying forces were under attack. German troops, however, learned to dread it. To them, the sight of a P-47 diving out of the sky, guns blazing, was a nightmare. Its 8 Brownings could rake a convoy in seconds, shredding trucks and cutting down infantry. Its bombs could obliterate rail junctions, tearing apart the arteries of supply. Where once the Luftwaffe had been the terror from above, now German soldiers muttered grimly about the Jabo, the Jag bomber, whose arrival meant sudden death from the sky. The Luftwaffe falters. The German Air Force was bleeding. Its veteran aces, the backbone of its strength, were being lost faster than they could be replaced. Every time the Thunderbolts rose to meet them, more black crosses fell from the sky. And even when the Luftwaffe scored victories, they were hollow. For every Jug shot down, American factories built two more. For every pilot lost, new men crossed the Atlantic to take their place. The Reich could not match such depth. Its own airfields were bombed daily, its fuel supplies dwindling, its young pilots rushed into combat with only the barest training. The once invincible Jagdgeschwader 26, which had mocked the Jug as a milk bottle, now found itself ground down, its laughter silenced. Hermaken and his comrades still fought with skill and courage, but the tide was against them. Fire over Rouen. One winter afternoon in early 1944, a formation of Thunderbolts swept low over the French city of Rouen. Their target, a German supply train laden with fuel and ammunition. The attack was sudden and devastating. Jugs dived in pairs, bombs tumbling from their wings, explosions ripping through the rail yard. Secondary blasts shook the earth as fuel cars ignited, sending pillars of black smoke high into the air. Survivors recalled the thunderclap roar of the Thunderbolts' guns as they strafed the tracks, cutting down German troops who scrambled for cover. When the Americans pulled away, the train was gone, reduced to twisted steel and fire. French civilians watching from afar cheered quietly, at risk of their lives, for they knew what such destruction meant. The occupier was bleeding. The Jug's reputation. By now, the P-47's reputation was solid. To Allied bomber crews, it was a guardian angel, thunder in the sky, a wall of fire between them and the enemy. To American infantry preparing for the great invasion yet to come, it was hope, a flying hammer that would one day clear the beaches and break the German defenses. To the Luftwaffe, it was an ever-growing menace, a machine that absorbed punishment and struck with merciless force. To German soldiers on the ground, it was terror itself. The laughter of 1943 had long since faded. Now there was only respect and fear. Prelude to invasion. The stage was being set for the greatest gamble of the war, the invasion of France. Without air superiority, the landings could never succeed. And without fighters like the P-47, air superiority could never be won. The Jug had proven itself in escort, had proven itself in ground attack, and had earned its place as one of the indispensable tools of Allied victory. It had begun as a joke, a milk bottle in the eyes of its enemies. Now it was a hammer, pounding at the Reich's gates. But its greatest test still lay ahead, the summer of 1944, when the skies over Normandy would roar with fire, and the Jug would descend as the thunder of liberation. By June of 1944, the stage was set. For years, the Allies had planned for this moment, the great gamble, the invasion of Fortress Europe. And when the morning of June 6th dawned over the beaches of Normandy, the sky itself shook with the roar of Allied air power. Among the thousands of aircraft swarming above the Channel was a familiar giant, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. No longer mocked, no longer underestimated, the Jug was now one of the decisive tools of liberation. D-Day, wings over Normandy. In the early hours of the invasion, German coastal defenses braced for attack. Concrete bunkers, artillery batteries, and armored reserves waited inland to hurl the Allies back into the sea. But long before German panzers could reach the beaches, the Jug descended. Flying in from England in wave after wave, P-47 squadrons pounded bridges, railroads, and convoys, choking German movement. They dove through clouds and flak, unleashing bombs and rockets that turned crossroads into craters and columns into smoking wreckage. One German officer later recalled that every road seemed under the watchful eye of American fighters. To move by daylight was suicide. Tanks that tried to approach Omaha or Utah Beach were spotted from above and destroyed within minutes. The Jug had become, quite literally, thunder from the sky. The Normandy breakout. The fighting in Normandy was brutal. For weeks, the Allies were trapped in the hedgerow country, dense fields, narrow lanes, and hidden German defenses. Progress was slow, losses were heavy. It seemed the Wehrmacht might hold them at bay. And then came Operation Cobra. On July 25th, Allied forces launched a massive aerial bombardment to shatter the German lines west of St. Lo. Heavy bombers pounded the front, and behind them came the fighter bombers, the Thunderbolts, striking artillery, tanks, and survivors scrambling for cover. When American infantry and armor surged forward, they found the defenders broken, stunned, and in retreat. The breakout had begun. The Jug, once just an escort, was now an executioner, smashing the resistance that stood in the way of Allied armies. Terror on the ground for German soldiers. 1944 was the year the sky became their deadliest enemy. The sight of a low-flying Thunderbolt was enough to scatter entire columns in panic. The Jug's 8 machine guns chewed through trucks, half-tracks, and fleeing infantry. Its bombs and rockets shredded tanks, smashing even the feared Panthers and Tigers when struck from above. Entire divisions found themselves immobilized by relentless attacks. German soldiers cursed the Jabo, spitting the word like venom. They knew the distinctive engine roar. They knew that cover meant survival. To be caught in the open was to die. Meanwhile, Allied troops on the ground came to love the sound. For them, the Jug was deliverance. When pinned by machine gun fire or ambushed by German armor, they called in the fighter bombers, and soon enough, the sky would rip apart with the shriek of a diving Thunderbolt, guns blazing, bombs falling, saving lives below. Across France and into Germany with Normandy behind them, the Allies surged across France in a tidal wave of liberation. Paris fell in August, greeted with cheers and tears of joy. But for the Luftwaffe, there was no joy, only despair. By now, German air power was a shadow of its former self. The skies were filled with Thunderbolts, Mustangs, and Spitfires. The once proud Jagdgeschwader fought on, but fuel was scarce, pilots inexperienced, and odds hopeless. The Jug pressed deeper, its missions shifting from support to annihilation. Rail lines were torn apart, bridges dropped into rivers, factories reduced to rubble. With every passing week, the Reich was strangled tighter, its armies starved of supplies, its cities battered into submission. The Bulge and the Blizzard. In December 1944, the Reich struck back. In the forests of the Ardennes, German armor and infantry launched a desperate counterattack, the Battle of the Bulge. For a moment, surprise and snow favored the Wehrmacht. Allied lines buckled, villages fell, and fear rippled across the front. At first, bad weather grounded Allied aircraft. For days, the sky was silent, and German columns surged forward. But when the clouds broke, the Jug returned with vengeance. Flying low over icy forests and frozen roads, P-47s hunted tanks and convoys, strafing and bombing relentlessly. Pilots recalled the eerie sight of burning panzers dotting the snow, black smoke curling into the winter sky. German advances stalled, then collapsed under the weight of relentless air attack. The last great gamble of the Reich had failed, crushed in part by the thunder overhead. Final thunder. As 1945 dawned, the end was near. The Allies surged into the Rhineland, and the Jug roared with them. Every day, its squadrons struck bridges, depots, and factories, cutting Germany to pieces. Civilians huddled in cellars as the earth shook with each raid. Soldiers deserted rather than face the ceaseless assaults. By April, the Jug flew over the ruins of German cities, unopposed. The Luftwaffe was broken, its aces dead or captured, its planes destroyed on the ground. And then came victory. On May 8, 1945, the guns fell silent. Across Europe, the Jug rested at last. Legacy of the Jug, the Republic. P-47 Thunderbolt had begun its war as a laughingstock, dismissed as too large, too heavy, too ungainly. Its enemies mocked it as a milk bottle. Yet by the end of the war, it had flown more than 500,000 combat sorties, destroyed thousands of enemy aircraft, tanks, and trains, and become one of the most feared machines of the Second World War. To the Germans, it was terror. To the Allies, it was salvation. To history, it was proof that sometimes the most unlikely machine can become a legend. The Jug did not have the sleek beauty of a Spitfire, nor the elegant grace of a Mustang, but it had something else: power, resilience, and the ability to deliver thunder wherever it was needed. And when the world remembers the liberation of Europe, It will always remember the sound of its mighty engine, roaring across the skies, a sound not of fear, but of freedom.